Welcome back to the Dershow. What a topsy-turvy world we live in. Even if you just focus on New York, wow. Downtown, we have the former president and the candidate to be the future president being tried for a non-crime. Nobody can figure out. Nobody can figure out. Apparently, he quoted me today, saying that there's no crime. He doesn't have to quote me. Any reasonable legal scholar who doesn't work for CNN or MSNBC would acknowledge there's just no crime here. That doesn't mean there won't be a conviction. In Alice in Wonderland, you get a conviction without a crime, and that's what may very well happen here. Although there's a possibility, obviously, of a hung jury or even conceivably of an acquittal. What should happen, of course, is the judge should dismiss the case at the close of the prosecution's presentation because he will have heard no evidence of any crime whatsoever being committed. So, but he's not going to do that, and so what we're seeing is a trial within a trial, and he's already been convicted now and sentenced to $9,000 in fines for violating an unconstitutional gag order. This judge doesn't seem to realize, he just doesn't seem to understand that he's imposing a prior restraint on the man running against his party for the presidency. He doesn't understand that a gag order is the personification, a paradigm of prior restraint. The First Amendment doesn't permit prior restraint, except in the most extraordinary circumstances. You can probably restrain the publication of the names of our spies or the codes of our atomic arsenal. Sure, you can do that. But in general, you don't engage in prior restraint. You don't order people not to say things that are clearly constitutionally protected. Take, for example, what President Trump is saying about witness Cohen. He's calling him a liar. He's entitled to do that. He is a liar. Not only, Cohen could sue him for defamation, but he'd lose because truth is a defense. And he is a liar. And the idea that you issue an order saying we're protecting the witnesses from what? Uh, the witnesses aren't going to be, Cohen's not going to be intimidated. He's not going to suddenly flee the country and run away or change his testimony. This is the most absurd and excessive invocation of prior restraint that I know of. The courts have upheld prior restraint, but only in the narrowest of circumstances. And this isn't even fit within a moderately narrow circumstance. It's so broad. And he didn't violate the order here, but he certainly is entitled to complain about the judge's daughter making a fortune off this case by the fact that her father is the judge who was threatening to put him in jail. And let's think about that for a second. The judge threatened to put Donald Trump in Rikers Island, essentially, for violating an unconstitutional gag order. Can you imagine the circumstances? He'd have to go to Rikers Island with his coterie of Secret Service agents. I don't know what kind of a cell they would put him in. Rikers Island is, of course, the most dangerous place in New York. People get killed there, get raped, get knifed. I've been to Rikers Island many times. I have to tell you, it is a really, really scary place. Just setting foot on that island and then going on the bus to visit the location where your client is in prison. I've done that too many times. Back when I retired from the active, day-to-day practice of law, the first thing I retired from was visiting people in prison because it's so difficult to visit people in prison. The inmates scream at you. In my case, they recognize me. Hey, where's your card? Where's your card? We want to call you. Maybe you'll be a lawyer. I was told that my card in prison is worth a lot of packs of cigarettes. People trade lawyers' cards the way we used to trade baseball cards as kids. And apparently I'm a Mickey Mantle or maybe even a Babe Ruth. I don't know, but my card is pretty valuable, I'm told, by the network, the prison network of some of my former clients who have served time in prison in places like Rikers Island. So I think the judge is bluffing. He's a blunderbuss. He's not going to put Donald Trump in jail, and if he does, virtually will assure his election. I mean that mugshot of him going off to prison would be worth even more than the mugshot when he was just arrested. I was one of those who had suggested early on that a T-shirt should be made of the mugshot, and it was, and it sold. It sold very well, almost as well as my friend Sid in the morning, who yelled out at the State of the Union message, "Says who? Says who?" And he got thrown out, and so they made a shirt out of "Says who." I have one of those shirts, and I wear it from time to time because growing up in Brooklyn, that was our answer to everybody. If somebody would say something that you disagree with, hey, says who? Says who? So Sid did a great job making a T-shirt of that, and also we had a First Amendment right to heckle the president's speech. If you have a right to cheer the president, you have the right to boo the president. If you have the right to say "right on, great speech," you have a right to say "says who." So I don't think that these contempt citations are going to land Donald Trump in prison. It's possible. This judge is capable of doing almost anything, but he'll get more and more fines. Probably these fines were $1,000. Maybe the next fines will be $10,000. They'll all be challenged on appeal, and at least some of them will be reversed on appeal because the First Amendment is pretty important. And the First Amendment doesn't end when you're presumed innocent. After all, he's no different than you and me in terms of our First Amendment rights and our presumption of innocence. He was indicted, sure, but as you know, this is not a quote from me. This is the chief judge of the New York Court of Appeals saying we all know the grand jury would indict a ham sandwich. And a New York grand jury would indict a ham sandwich named Donald Trump as quickly as you can say ham. And so the grand jury indictment means nothing. How many times has Alfred Bragg asked a grand jury for an indictment and been turned down? I think the answer to that is probably a big goose egg. Prosecutors don't get turned down by grand juries. Grand juries do the bidding of prosecutors, and that's a well-known fact. So what we have today is Donald Trump has been convicted of 9 counts of contempt of court. He's been convicted for exercising his constitutional rights. And the Columbia students who have not exercised their constitutional rights, in the beginning, maybe they did. Some of them called for a ceasefire. Now, that's my favorite part of it. They called for a ceasefire. We now know, because the Secretary of State Blinken has told us, that the only thing that stands between a ceasefire and the people of Gaza is Hamas. Israel has offered a ceasefire. Blinken characterized it as I think he said it twice, a very, very generous offer. They've reduced the number of hostages from 40 to 33. They've increased the number of people, convicted murderers that would be released. They would get a ceasefire out of it. Hamas has said no. Of course Hamas has said no. If I were Hamas's lawyer, I wouldn't be Hamas's lawyer. I don't represent ongoing criminals, ongoing terrorists. But if I were their strategist, I would say, why would you accept the ceasefire? You're winning this war. You're losing it in Gaza. Gazans are being killed, but you don't care about that. You're winning it on the campuses. You're winning it for the future leaders of America. Don't have a ceasefire. By the way, if there were a ceasefire, these Hitler Youth, these young Nazis who are parading on college campuses, they wouldn't even know there was a ceasefire because they don't care about the Palestinians. That's the big secret. They couldn't care less about the Palestinians. They don't even know anything about them. They don't know that very few Palestinians who are actually really innocent, I mean, babies and children, not people who cheered on Hamas, who voted for Hamas, who congratulated their son on the telephone for killing 10 Jews. I'm talking about really innocent people in Gaza. The numbers are very low, probably in the low thousands, compared to 13 to 15,000 terrorists who have been killed by the IDF. There's never been a better ratio of civilian to combatant deaths in any war in history. They don't know that. And if they did, they wouldn't care about it. They don't know that there's no starvation, that there's no famine. Even the UN has said there may be a famine in June. No, there's not, because Israel is now providing lots and lots of food, much of it being stolen by Hamas. And the United States is providing food through their new floating port that they're building on the Mediterranean. So don't shed any tears for the hungry people of Gaza. The students at Columbia who took over Hamilton Hall, they're probably hungrier. They haven't eaten since yesterday, and they're trying to get food up through kind of dumb waiters for dumb people in Hamilton Hall. But there's no famine and there's no genocide. These students don't know what they're talking about. Genocide. Genocide is what happened to the Jews. The term genocide was coined. It's the attempt to eradicate an entire race, to take babies and put them in gas chambers, to take people, make them dig their own pits and then shoot them in cold blood. 6 million of them. That's genocide. What's going on in Gaza, a few thousand innocent people who are being used as human shields. That's not genocide. If that's genocide, then America engaged in genocide over and over again in Afghanistan and Iraq, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Dresden, Berlin, Tokyo, you name it. Self-defense wars are not genocide. Yeah, innocent people get killed. People who vote for terrorists, people who vote for the Nazi Party, people who vote, for communists, and then there's a war, they die as a result of that. That's why you shouldn't vote for people who want to bring you into war. Even in America, the Americans didn't vote to go into the Second World War. They probably wouldn't have gone into the Second World War. They were providing aid to Britain through Lend-Lease, but it was only after they were attacked at Pearl Harbor and then Germany declared war on them. And then they declared war on Germany and Romania and Japan. And that's the last time, by the way, we ever declared war. Our Constitution requires that wars be declared by Congress before they can be fought. But we've ignored that particular part of our Constitution. We don't call them wars anymore. We call them police actions, or other euphemisms to evade the constitutional requirement that declaration of wars can only be done by Congress. But, the situation now on college campuses is so dangerous because it just reflects the fact that probably tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of young college ignoramuses who are being propagandized by their slightly older college ignoramuses called professors. I was on television yesterday with the chairman of the philosophy department at Emory University. My God, if she's teaching my children, boy, I sure don't want to pay $90,000 a year for tuition. These tenured faculty, particularly those that teach in ethnic studies departments, they're not qualified. They wouldn't be able to get jobs in real departments, but there are all these made-up departments, these ethnic and gender and other kinds of study departments, which are cheering squads for their particular ethnic group, have no place in universities, just like DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is against diversity, intellectual diversity, against equality, and against real inclusion. They have no real place in a university, but after the George Floyd killing, hundreds of millions of dollars were spent creating these bureaucracies that have been the incubator for anti-Semitism in many, many major universities. If you look at the students who are involved, these Hitler Youth, a lot of them aren't studying science, math. They're not doing STEM. They're not studying economics. They're studying, transgender political rights in the racial context of colonialism and anti-colonialism. I mean, they're not studying real subjects, and they're getting A's. Because how do you get anything but an A in subjects like that? It's all opinion, and all opinions are created equal according to equity and equality and lack of equality. You have to grade everybody, otherwise it's not equity. And you have to admit everybody, otherwise it's not equity. And you admit them not in terms of their meritocracy, but in terms of what race they belong to, what gender they belong to, what sexual orientation they belong to. And you make sure that each of those identity politics groups is represented at the university in proportion to their numbers, which of course means that Jews are going to be down to 2% or 3%. Even if they're qualified for admission, there are going to be quotas. There are quotas already. They're implicit. They used to be explicit. You know that Harvard went and had an explicit quota, keeping the number of Jews to 10%. There were more Jews admitted to Harvard under the quota than there are today. Now it's 9% because of DEI, because of the fight against meritocracy, because of our refusal to recognize individual qualifications and instead judge everybody based on what Martin Luther King rejected. Again, his famous dream, I dream of a day when my children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He would be held to be guilty of a microaggression today, maybe a macroaggression, at many of the same universities that say it's okay to say genocide against the Jews. It's okay to say we are Hamas. It's okay to say that Zionists don't deserve to live. That's all okay. But my God, saying that things should be equal, that meritocracy should be the way universities are run, no, you can't say that. That's an aggression. That's almost as bad as stating the wrong pronoun for somebody. But, you can say anything you want about Jews. You can say anything you want about Christians. You can say anything you want about people who favor a woman's, pregnancy over a woman's right to choose. I don't support that view. I favor a woman's right to choose, certainly at the beginning and toward the middle of pregnancy, but that's not the point. The point is, I want a university where people have a diverse array of views on abortion, a diverse array of views on the Second Amendment, a diverse array of views on freedom of religion or the role of religion. I'm in favor of all of that, but that's not what we're seeing today on American universities. Again, the ignorance that we're seeing in these demonstrations, the fact that nobody seems to know or care that Israel has been pleading for a ceasefire to save the lives of Gazans, and it's Hamas that doesn't want a ceasefire, that wants to see more Gazans killed. Either they don't know it or they know it and they're prepared to lie about it. Either way, $90,000 a year tuition. I went to Brooklyn College between 1955 and 1959. You know how much I paid for 4 years of college? I got a education in those days better than the education at Harvard. I made money. Tuition was zero. If you couldn't afford books, the school would give you the books, and nobody lent you money. They gave you the money. And I got a state scholarship. I competed. I took a test. I was a terrible student in high school. But you could take a test, and I was a good test taker. And I took a test, and I won a state scholarship, and I got $1,400. That was a fortune in those days to go to college. It paid for my first year at Yale Law School. If not for meritocracy, I wouldn't have gotten an education. I got a great education at Brooklyn College for free. Now for $90,000, you learn about transgender colonialism. And the absurdity of intersectionality, this notion that there is a closer relationship between the Emir of Qatar, because he's Arab, and some poor person of color, because they're both members of groups that are unprivileged because they're of a certain skin color. Whereas a poor Jew, even a Sephardic Jew of dark skin, is automatically privileged and automatically an oppressor because they're Jewish. That's what they said in Germany in the 1933s and 1934s. That's what they said. They said Jews are privileged. They're ruining the economy. They have too much power. They have too much privilege. And you hear that now. You hear it from some people on the right. We heard it from Charlottesville. But you hear it dominantly from the left today. And we hear so much in support of left-wing terrorists. I just was listening on a show that a student center at City College was named after terrorist murderers. I've told you the Kathy Boudin story where she finishes her prison term for murdering 2 policemen and 2 armed guards. And where does she end up? Teaching at Columbia University, totally unqualified. She didn't have a PhD, and she didn't have experience. She had taught in prison, sure, but what did she teach in prison? She taught kind of radicalism in prison. Wouldn't surprise me if some of the students who are out there as Hitler Youth today were her students. I knew Kathy when she was 18 or 19 years old. She was a student, and she came to me for advice about a term paper she was writing about the grand juries. And I gave her advice. We sat down and we talked for several hours, and I stayed in touch with her. Her father and mother were friends of mine. But she turned from a protester where I defended her. I was not her lawyer, but I defended her right to protest the Vietnam War. But she turned from a protester into a terrorist. And that's what's happening today on college campuses. It's going to happen more and more and more. And so, this is a problem that is not going away. The end of the semester is not going to end this. The deep hatred of Israel, the deep hatred of America, the deep hatred of the Constitution, the deep hatred of free speech for one's political opponents, the deep hatred for real diversity of opinion, the real hatred for tolerance is pervasive and is going to be our future and is going to be what dominates people to tomorrow and the day after tomorrow in the media and in universities and in Congress and maybe someday in the presidency. So be wary, be concerned. There's something to worry about. Let's look at some letters. Okay. If these pro-Palestinian, I don't call them pro-Palestinian, they're anti-Palestinian. If they were pro-Palestinian, they'd favor a ceasefire and they would oppose Hamas. These pro-Palestinian protesters get the January 6th protest, the treatment from the police and FBI. They would not be so aggressive and continue the protests. You're absolutely right. These protests are more dangerous than January 6th. January 6th were misguided patriots who did the wrong thing, and they got treated as if they were engaged in treason, unlike the Black Lives Matter protesters, which were treated with kid gloves, as these protesters in Columbia probably will be. What's going to happen to the Democratic National Convention? Will history repeat itself? Well, I was the lawyer for many at the Democratic National Convention. I was one of the lawyers. I did the appeal in the Chicago 7 case. And I think we will see a repetition. I think we will see disruptions at the Democratic National Convention. Okay. Let's see where else we are. What do you think SCOTUS will make a ruling? When do you think SCOTUS will make a ruling on the presidential immunity case? I think they can do it fairly quickly. I think it'll be 6-3, maybe it'll be 5-4, and it'll split the baby. There'll be some immunity, but a limited immunity for the president. The president's lawyer, former president, lawyer conceded that some of what he said is not subject to immunity. So he made the job of the court a lot easier. Just cut the funding of these universities. You'll see what lack of dollars does to the protest. Well, the funding is supposed to be cut, actually, if violations occur of various statutory regulations, and they do. The Hamas charter is like Mein Kampf. I am embarrassed that Columbia is on my resume. The Hamas charter is like Mein Kampf. It blames the Jews for everything. It is not just anti-Israel. It is virulently anti-Semitic. Angela Davis showed up in America campus on Denver on Sunday. But you know who else has praised these protesters? The leaders of Iran. The leaders of Iran. The leaders of Hamas. If you're praised by Angela Davis, the squad, the leaders of Iran, The leaders of Hamas, you must be doing something wrong. The only people that haven't praised them are the Nazi Party. I'm sure David Duke is praising them, but I haven't heard from David Duke recently. But you judge people sometimes by who praises them. You certainly judge people by who attacks them, and I love the fact that I'm attacked by so many people, and the people who attack me are the right people. Rumor is it that Fergie Chambers, heir of the Cox Communications, bought the temps. I don't know whether the rumor is true. I know, I know Fergie Chambers. I've known him since he's this high. He's the grandson of one of my closest friends. My late friend Jim's daughter married the heir to the Cox fortune. They got divorced, but they had a son, and their son is Fergie, who I've known for years. Last saw him at his grandfather's funeral. He was always a kind of crazy, mixed up kid. When I saw him most recently, his friends described him as a kind of old fashioned communist and virulently anti-Israel and virulently anti-American. So it wouldn't surprise me. Why do I know so many of these people? I know Fergie Cox. I knew Kathy Boudin. Don't blame me. I knew their parents. That's how I got to know them. So good people, good parents. My friend Jim was one of the nicest people in the world. He was a Quaker, hated war, great civil libertarian. He and I used to go to Celtics games together. I loved Jim. He was one of my closest friends, but he's not responsible for his grandchild, and he's been gone now for a long time, and it's a blessing probably that he didn't live to see his grandson. Although Jim was not Jewish, he was a strong supporter of Israel and a strong supporter of the First Amendment and civil liberties. We served together on the Civil Liberties Union. So this is another one that says funding would come from a Cox cable heir. It's ironic because, Cox family is very conservative, and yet they have a grandson who is this way. This is an interesting letter, also about somebody I know. Now that the unrest has come to Emory College, where my wife went to undergraduate and loved it, how come you haven't heard from Deborah Lipstadt on this topic? Deborah is a great woman. She is the Biden administration's head person on anti-Semitism. You'd think that there are two reasons she should speak out. One, this is right in her wheelbarrow, anti-Semitism. She's written all these books about anti-Semitism. And second, she was a professor at Emory. I know I visited her when I went down there some years ago to give a lecture. Deborah, speak up. You should be speaking out against anti-Semitism. Silence is not an option in the face of anti-Semitism. I worry that anybody who's in the Biden administration has to watch their tongue because they're afraid about Biden losing some votes of some young people. He ought to lose their votes. Nobody should be elected president based on the votes of Hitler Youth, based on the votes of the people who have taken over University Hamilton Hall. And so, yeah. All right, my favorite last question. What are your favorite Woody Allen movies? All right, unrelated subject. You probably know Woody's a friend of mine. I have dinner with him and his wife, Sunyi, once every couple of months. I was opposed to him in court. I represented Mia Farrow against him, but we have renewed our friendship over the years. I love almost every Woody Allen movie. I'm an addict. Crimes and Misdemeanors, probably the most serious, great movie. I mean, really a movie worthy of Bergman. Blue Jasmine is a great movie. Radio Days is probably my favorite funny movie. Broadway Danny Rose, you got to see that opening scene in the Carnegie Deli. So I could go on all night about Woody Allen movies, and I've seen his most recent movies. He's invited me to premieres of them. They can't play in America. American distributors won't play them because he was accused. It's so easy to make an accusation of something he denied. And as you know, the district attorney of Connecticut examined the allegations against them and did not proceed and prosecute him. And so there's no evidence beyond the uncorroborated word of a child who was 7 years old. In any event, Woody is a friend. I like him. I admire him. I like his wife, and I love his movies. And I wish he'd make more of them. And I wish more Americans would see more of them. They've gotten rave reviews in Europe, and they've been bestsellers in Europe. They've sold out, and they deserve awards. Woody Allen is the greatest filmmaker of our time, and so I'm honored to be his friend.